How much does an FCA, a functional capacity assessment, cost? This is a transparent look at pricing, what the fee covers, and the questions worth asking before you accept any quote. So functionalcapacityassessments.com.au, we're a business that does Australia-wide telehealth functional capacity assessments where clinically appropriate. We do NDIA-managed, plan, and self-managed. So the direct answer, it depends on the scope. So how much does an FCA cost? That's a standard FCA, a standard functional capacity assessment. It's 15 hours at the NDIS billing rate of 2,910. Prices may have gone up a little bit with the release of the new Papal NDIS price guide, but essentially it's approximately $2,910. You get 15 hours of assessment, analysis, and reporting. So there's no upfront payment required for NDIS funded assessments. The cost across the market varies with scope, what the assessment must cover, complexity of the participant situation, the delivery method sometimes makes a difference, not often, the location, if any travel is involved, and the report requirements and deadlines. So pricing is current at the time of recording. Always check functionalcapacityassessments.com.au/prices for the latest. What the fee may cover. So there's intake and planning, there's document reviews. You might have reports from other allied health clinicians or doctors or reports that need to be reviewed. There's face-to-face assessment sessions or telehealth assessment sessions. There's stakeholder consultation, which could be complex or it could be simple. There's scoring and interpretation across all the different reports that may be used to produce a FCA or a functional capacity assessment. There's report preparation, a quality review, and feedback and clarification. So we're included in the agreed scope. Most of the hours in an FCA happen away from the appointment itself. How complexity affects the work. So if you've got multiple diagnoses, interacting conditions can take longer, obviously, to assess and reason through. There's more complexity. If you've got communication issues or needs, there might be more time required. We might have to adapt our methods or have some type of supported communication piece. If you're a higher risk profile or if the participant is a higher risk profile, risks must be assessed and documented carefully. If it's home and living questions, if you're applying or wishing to apply for funding for SIL, SDA, or ILO, the evidence requires greater depth and different questioning and different reasoning. And if you've got many stakeholders, so some participants have lots of stakeholders, so it takes longer to do these assessments, but each consultation adds interview and analysis time. So documents and consultations add up. That's the volume driver of hours. So document review on the left here, every report must be read and reconciled. Years of records take real time to read and review. Conflicting reports need extra analysis, and there are often conflicting reports. And all those documents need a thorough review, because with a thorough review and contemporaneous file notes about those documents, you get a stronger evidence piece when you're applying for funding with the NDIS. So stakeholder consultation on the right. So each consultation is scheduled, conducted, analysed. Multiple perspectives across multiple modalities and stakeholders strengthen the report. More voices equals more synthesis time. So these things all take time, but scope is agreed at intake. Telehealth versus in-person, cost implication. So telehealth, we're a telehealth-based company. We chose to go telehealth for a number of reasons. Many of us come from regional areas, and telehealth is one of the only ways really to reach into those regional areas. I struggled to find local FCAs and OTs that could do FCAs for us, even in Newcastle. When I first started, the wait times were significant, like 1 month, 3 months. I can remember traveling to Melbourne to see my son, stopping in Albury Wodonga, and was told that some of the wait times there for a face-to-face OT to do an FCA with upwards of 3 months plus. So we chose telehealth for a reason. We don't charge the remote rates to do FCA. So generally speaking, there's, remote rates for most things in the NDIS. We don't charge any remote rates. So there's no travel costs or no remote rates built into the fee. We think that's a much more palatable way of doing business. Because it's telehealth, it's available Australia-wide, appropriate for many assessments. There obviously are some. There's always exceptions to the rule where face-to-face OT may be better in some circumstances, but generally speaking, we've found that we've been able to do high-quality functional capacity assessments and home and living assessments via telehealth. It's very appropriate, and the suitability is confirmed at intakes. We do some in-person, so sometimes it's clinically necessary for some matters. If we have a local OT that's happy to do face-to-face in-person work and that comes up, then that's kind of how it happens for us. We don't look for it, but it does happen. For equipment trials, home measurements and manual handling, it may be more appropriate. Depends on the type of trials, measurements or manual handling. Often these things can be done via telehealth and remotely as well. Travel charges may apply by location if it's in person, and sometimes it's better via a local provider. So the report scope, current published options. So here are our current published options that we offer. You can have an NDIS Access Request Assessment. So this is for people who aren't on the NDIS at present, but are looking for some type of help to prepare paperwork and prepare a submission to the NDIS. There's plenty of groups out there who may help you do this for free. Your doctor may help you do it for free. I'm not suggesting in any way, shape or form that you have to pay anyone to apply to the NDIS, but it's sometimes more appropriate to get some level of OT assessment done on the way in to strengthen the evidence for assessment. And so therefore we've put a package together called the NDIS Access Request Assessment, where our OTs will do maybe a HUDAS assessment and they'll help you fill in the paperwork, write whatever assessments they need or extra information to help add weight to your assessment bundle for the NDIS application process. So the standard functional capacity assessments are 15 hours. That's the gold standard. Let's see what functions you've got across the 6 domains. Let's wrap language around what impacts those functions have across the 6 functional domains. We're very good at using language that maps actual functional capacity to the 6 domains for the NDIS. That's all we do. So that's the standard functional capacity assessment. It's probably 80% of what we do, I suppose. And then you might need some extra evidence. You might need the functional capacity assessment plus some STA evidence, and that's 25 hours. You might want a functional capacity assessment, but then you also want an assessment that supports an independent living funding request. So that's 30 hours in total. You might already have a functional capacity assessment, but just want a ILO assessment. That's a different price. You can talk to us about that. But if you want an FCA plus a SIL, a supported independent living assessment, there's 30 hours worth of work in that. So that's 5,820. And you may want an FCA plus a SDA, a specialist disability accommodation, and a SIL assessment, which is about 35 hours for our OTs to get all those assessments and reports done. So they're the prices. A larger scope isn't automatically better. The right assessment is the one that answers the referral question. So prices are current at the date of recording. Please jump on our website, functionalcapacityassessments.com.au/prices. to see if anything has changed. Now, it's very important that you go through and apply for the right things. If you jump onto the website, the Functional Capacity Assessment website, we've got a decision tree tool on the front page and also on its own page where you can answer some basic questions and work through that decision tree, and it will actually tell you what the most likely report or assessment required would be given the information that you're given us. So jump onto the website, use the decision tree would be my coaching to everyone out there. So can NDIS funding be used? So whether an FCA can be paid from a participant's plan depends on the participant's funding, how the plan is managed, the applicable rules, and the purpose of the assessment. So assessments are generally claimed under capacity building supports where funding is available. Now, that's the key piece here. Sometimes funding isn't available. You don't have the funding for some reason. So it's super important to make sure you've got funding available before you book and ask for an FCA, because we can't do it if there's no funding available. NDIA-managed or agency-managed, plan-managed and self-managed participants are all supported. NDIA-managed services are delivered through a registered provider entity. Funding is reviewed and confirmed at intake before any work begins. So the process is you'd reach out to us, you'd have a quick chat, we go through a decision tree, we work out what we think you need, we look at the pricing, we make sure you've got the funding available, we work out how you are funded, whether it's agency managed, NDIA, plan managed or self-managed. We get you a service agreement sent out, you sign it, and then we allocate an appropriate OT to move forward. So that's kind of how the process works. Questions to ask before accepting any quote. So what exactly is included? What a great question. Is document review included? Great question again. Is travel included if it's going to be face-to-face? Follow-up questions included? How many assessment hours as opposed to how many non-face-to-face hours? Is stakeholder consultation included? What type of report is provided? What is the expected process? And another one I'd add in here is how many specific NDIS functional capacity assessments do you do? Now, I'm not suggesting that an OT that does 80% face-to-face actual occupational therapy work can't write a quality FCA or a SIL or an SDA assessment, but the OTs that we have writing these assessments, they're particularly suited to it. That's all they do. Sometimes a certain profile is better suited to write assessments compared to doing actual OT work. Cheap versus appropriate. So price alone may tell you what you'll pay today, nothing about scope or hours, nothing about the depth of reasoning, nothing about fit for the question. The real helicopter view here is we see lots of functional capacity assessments that are done that aren't fit for purpose. The language isn't applicable. It doesn't link actual functional capacity or issues with function to the 6 domains. We've got some really good resources on the website around that. I would highly recommend anyone thinking about getting a functional capacity assessment goes through our decision tree and also has a look at the language that's required around the 6 functional domains for all these types of assessments, not just functional capacity assessments, but it's really important to link the language with the functional domains. So price alone doesn't tell you much. Appropriate means, the scope matches the referral question. There's enough hours to do the work properly. It does take the hours that we quote in those slides before it really does. You need to have clear, defensible clinical reasoning. The easiest thing for any person who's reviewing an assessment to do is just to ignore it if there's not clear, defensible clinical reasoning, and the evidence has to hold up when scrutinised. So a report that doesn't answer the question may need to be redone. The most expensive assessment is the one you have to pay for twice. We do a lot of rework on other people's functional capacity assessments. It's not great that that happens in the industry, but it's the same in every industry. There are some people who are really good at things and some people who aren't very good at things. It's all we do. So we think we're the gold standard in functional capacity assessment production for NDIS participants. So how to get an assessment or an estimate? I briefly went over this before. There's a few steps. You submit the referral. We've got a secure intake form on the website. It only takes a few minutes. Provide some background, some relevant reports and context, whatever you've got really. Describe the purpose, what decision or question the assessment is for, because some are a plan, a plan assessment, some are a change in circumstances, some might be going to the ART. It's important that we understand what the purpose of the FCA is for. Flag any deadlines. If you've got to have it done in 7 days or 2 weeks or a month, you need to let us know. We can turn reports around in 7 days after all the interviews and assessments have been provided. So if we've got all the source documents, if we've done all the online telehealth assessments with the participant, we can generally get reports turned around in a few days. So if it's time sensitive, if it's time critical, please let us know. And then you'll get a received confirmation that the scope is right, the suitability and the cost is right. All that'll come out in the service agreement before the work begins. So nothing happens until you sign a service agreement anyway. And we want to make sure that there's funding there and everything can go smooth. Once you've signed your service agreement and it comes back, we'll allocate an OT. So important information before you decide. This information is general in nature and does not guarantee NDIS funding. No assessment or functional capacity assessment will. Plan approval or any particular outcome is also not guaranteed. So assessment recommendations depend on the participant's circumstances, available evidence and professional clinical judgment. NDIA decisions are made independently. So the services are subject to participant consent, to participants having enough funding, to clinical suitability and agreed scope of work. As discussed prior, some matters may require in-person assessment or additional evidence. And if you need to get in contact with us, you can request an FCA cost or a quote or a proposal and a suitability review, get a scope, get some suitability likely cost by going to functionalcapacityassessments.com.au. Phone number 1300 976 400. There's a link there to book a call. There's a great decision tree that you can use that we don't require an email or anything like that for you to use it. Just jump in there and have a play around. But if you've got any questions, we've got a good intake team. Feel free to reach out, book a call on the calendar or email us.